Greetings everyone, it is me Shadow Leon 659 once again, and today I would love to talk about two shows which are often regarded as one of Cartoon Network's best shows ever. And those two shows for today are Dexter's Laboratory and Powerpuff Girls. Although I will not be talking about the entire shows themselves, but I will be talking about, should I say, the last two seasons of both shows and how they vary in quality. Yeah, of course, you already know that I see similarities for how both these shows were. Dexter's Laboratory was at its peak in popularity during its first two seasons. You can also say the same for Powerpuff Girls and whatnot. Both eventually got movies, and both shows, should I say, despite the movies intended to being where intend both shows having their movies be intended to be their endings, they were renewed for two more seasons. But of course, we already know that the quality of both seasons dipped in quality, and of course, most of the original writing staff was not involved. So, like I said before, we are debating on which of the two seasons as far is better or worse than the other. So anyway, let us start off with Dexter's Laboratory. Yeah, Dexter's Laboratory needs no introduction. It was and still is one of my favorite childhood shows of all time. And of course, should I say, who could ever forget the whole Dexter's Laboratory theme song that plays towards the ending credits in Dexter's Laboratory. It's the smartest boy you ever see. But of course, that's not the point exactly. So of course, you already know that the first two seasons I quite enjoy the most. Although if you had asked me between which seasons I enjoy the most between the first two, between season 1 and 2 of Dexter's Laboratory, I primarily like season 2 more because, you know, season 2 has most of the best episodes, how experimental it was and whatnot. And that movie, Dexter's Laboratory Ego Trip, is where I feel the show should have ended and whatnot. Because you can so obviously tell Gendy and staff wanted the show not to end on a whimper, but to end with a bang. And then, of course, in a way, Dexter's Laboratory Ego Trip kind of felt like a precursor to what Gendy's later cartoon would be, Samurai Jack. I mean, when you think about it, in the third act of the movie, we see the Dexters go to that reality and where Mandark is supreme ruler and whatnot, and it has become a dystopian world. And then they meet Action Dexter and where he's the savior and whatnot, kind of like a precursor to what Samurai Jack was gonna be. And of course, should I say, a love letter to 80s action to 80s and 90s action heroes, a la Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone, because that's what Action Dexter reminded me of. But then, of course, we all know that CN would not let the show die, would not let the show end, because they were still airing reruns of the show and they were still attracting a large quantity of viewers. So they decided to make two last seasons of Dexter's Laboratory without Gendy's involvement, because as far as you know, for the last two seasons, Gendy had little, if any, involvement in those last two seasons, and boy does it show. I mean, you can so obviously tell in the writing quality, the portrayal of the characters, how much time the episodes drag out, and last but not least, oh, when you look at the art style, my god, the art style is such a huge downgrade and you can so obviously tell. I mean, especially in season 3, gone are the colorful, vibrant and detailed backgrounds from the first two seasons, replaced with these dull, flat, lifeless backgrounds and whatnot. Sure, the backgrounds did improve in quality in the fourth season, but unfortunately, it still wasn't enough to salvage the show and whatnot. The art style kind of makes the show feel like a cheap reboot of Dexter's Laboratory produced in some low budget studio in a foreign country. I mean, when you had episodes like an episode dedicated to Mandark's laugh, and an entire episode in where Dexter's dad spends the whole show doing nothing but trying to whack a ball, and it lasts for over 5 minutes. What was the thought process behind these writers? And of course, should I say, the plots got repetitive, and the and should I say it just didn't even fit with what the last two seasons were with what the first two seasons of the show were. And I am not gonna mention the showrunner's name because we of course already know that he's a sex pest and would later go on to make that bloody overrated Loud House show. But I'm not gonna say that this season was completely bad. There were still some good episodes, don't get me wrong, but sadly, most episodes in these last two seasons were either mediocre at best or steaming piles of crap at worst, and they feel like rejected ideas from the first two seasons or rejected shorts from the first two seasons. And I also forgot to mention that the lack of major characters, like you're wondering, where are all these other characters like Mimi and Lily, or Action Hank, or the Justice Friends, or Agent Honeydew? Where did they all go? Never explained. So anyway, that's what I've got to say about the last two seasons of Dexter's Laboratory. And let us also now get into the last two seasons of Powerpuff Girls. Yeah, of course, Powerpuff Girls is one of my favorite childhood shows of all time and whatnot. You can already tell by how much of an action show it was and how heavily influenced by anime the show was. The show was so heavily inspired by anime, combining both action, comedy, and sometimes drama occasionally. And of course, should I say, it's just a shame that the Powerpuff Girls movie unfortunately underperformed at the box office, because who knows how many more CN movies we could have seen. I also heard that there were plans to do a live-action Johnny Bravo movie with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, which unfortunately never got made because Cartoon Network scrapped those ideas for future movies and whatnot, but that's not the point exactly. But between the first 4 seasons of the show, it's kind of really hard to choose between which of the four seasons was my favorite. But if there's one thing I do remember about the fourth season is that for some odd reason in the area I lived in, the fourth season was rarely, if ever, aired. And that's a real shame considering that season 4 had quite a number of good episodes, like the Dick Hardley episode and some others I may not unfortunately remember. Forgive me on that, I just haven't watched the show in quite a long time. But then of course, after the show was done with production and after the show wrapped up production and the movie also wrapped up production, half of the team went to work on Samurai Jack, while the other half, including the show's creator Craig McCracken, did go to work on the upcoming Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, so it was pretty much a split. And of course, they brought in a new team, and just like with Dexter's Laboratory, Craig McCracken had far less involvement in these last 2 seasons, and oh boy, you can really tell. It And just like Dexter's Laboratory, both it also had a significant downgrade in art style and animation. Because wow, the art style for this show really declined and whatnot. And quite a number of the episodes, like with Dexter's Laboratory, were, how can I say, mediocre at best or steaming piles of crap at worst. And sometimes there were plenty of episodes that didn't focus much on the action. You know, one of the show's main selling points. That's one of the reasons why Powerpuff Girls was such an iconic and memorable show, not just because of its humor, but also because of its action. And of course, the thing I also dislike about about this last two seasons that also plagued Dexter's Labrador is that both shows were known for having fast-paced humor and comedy, but you have jokes that drag on longer than a Family Guy cutaway gag. I mean, my God, that's exactly what it feels like. It kind of feels like you're watching, should I say, a long extended Family Guy cutaway gag. And I think that there was one scene in Powerpuff Girls that perfectly sums up how I feel about this entire season in general. And this clip is right here.
Captain Crack McCragen? You mean the Captain Crack McCragen? The famous Captain Crack McCragen and the crew of the Black Watch? The wildest bunch of buccaneers ever to sail the seven seas?
Aye, that we are.
Fascinating. But you disappeared hundreds of years ago.
We didn't disappear. We be right here.
Rumor had it that you got caught in the fabled Townsville Bay vortex just off the coast. It must have catapulted you into the future, which is incredible. I even did my college thesis on it, much to the ridicule of my peers. I discovered that it always appears in twos, which means that it should show itself again soon, providing an opportunity to travel back to your own time. You know, I'm a scientist. I can help.
Do you have the treasure?
No.
Do you know where a big tree is?
No.
You're walking the plank.
And that's exactly how I feel about the pacing in during these last two seasons. I'm like, good God, how did anyone look at this and give it a gold star of approval? And just like with Dexter's Laboratory, everything took a significant downgrade. Now, don't get me wrong. In these last two seasons, they also did have plenty of good episodes and whatnot, like the return of the Roundy Rough Boys and the Seducer episode, in where she plans to get her revenge on the Powerpuff Girls and whatnot for, you know, desecrating her hair and everything. So yeah, the last two seasons weren't all bad for both sides of the show. If anything, I would take the last two seasons of both of these shows any day of the week over Simpsons over the last few years, or any Modern Family Guy episode, or any other bad show that is worth mentioning, and any other bad show that I've pretty much brushed under a rug. So, which comes back to my question. Which of these two seasons do I declare better? Do I declare the last two seasons of Powerpuff Girls to be good, to be better, or do I declare the last two seasons of Dexter's Laboratory to be better? Well, I'm gonna take this with a grain of salt. And if I'm being brutally honest, I think I'd rather much watch the last two seasons of Powerpuff Girls. Because heck, for as disappointing as these last two seasons were, at least there was quite a number of enjoyable episodes. Not that the last two seasons of Dexter's Laboratory should I say, no redeeming qualities to it. Those last two seasons of Dexter's Laboratory also did have plenty of good episodes and whatnot. But I think the good episodes of the last two seasons of Powerpuff Girls outweigh the bad episodes of the last two seasons of Dexter's Laboratory. So anyway, that's my debate of which is better. Powerpuff Girls season 5 to 6 or Dexter's Laboratory season 3 to 4. So, what are your thoughts on the quality of the last two seasons of Powerpuff Girls and Dexter's Laboratory? Let me know in the comment section down below, and thanks for watching as always. Don't forget to subscribe for more content. Shadow Leon 659 signing out.